You never forget the way your mother looks at you, especially when she's looking through you. Growing up, I got used to that distant gaze, that half-second delay before she acknowledged my presence in the room. My name, Emily, always seemed to linger last on her lips like an afterthought. If she were handing out accolades, they'd never land in my direction. Instead, they flew toward my sister, Sophie. Like homing pigeons drawn to the sun. Sophie was the golden child, charming, talented, beautiful, and utterly adored. I was the other one. Not a problem child, not a rebel, not even the smart one you hear about in these stories. Just ... forgettable. Our childhood home was a modest, two-story house nestled in a quiet suburb. White picket fence, flower boxes under the windows, the smell of cinnamon and detergent always in the air. The kind of place people imagine when they think of the American dream. But within those walls, a subtle imbalance grew like mold behind. Wallpaper undetected by guests, but suffocating to live with. Sophie's bedroom was decorated with designer bedding and shelves full of her favorites, handpicked by Mom herself. Mine, hand-me-downs and a single poster I bought with my own babysitting money. When guests came over, Mom would beam and say, "Have you seen Sophie's recital video? Let me play it for you." Meanwhile, my awards and certificates were stuffed into drawers. Once, I remember getting a perfect score on my math test in 6th grade. I handed it to Mom with excitement practically bursting from my chest. She looked at it, smiled weakly, and said, "That's great, sweetie. Now go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." But when Sophie landed a role in a community play one, where she had exactly 3 lines, it was like the Pope had personally blessed our household. Balloons, cake, flowers, a party. I stopped trying after a while. Not out of spite, but out of understanding. There's a certain clarity that comes with acceptance. Some daughters are loved loudly. Some are loved ... quietly. And some aren't really loved at all, they're just tolerated. But I wasn't bitter, not yet. I learned to live in the background, like wallpaper. You don't look at it. You don't admire it. But if it weren't there, the room would feel naked. Sophie and I weren't enemies. That's the funny part. We didn't fight, scream, or sabotage each other. But we also weren't close. She saw me the way she saw our kitchen chairs, always there. Always useful, but never central to the story. Her life was a constant audition for our mother's approval, and I had long bowed out of the competition. After high school, Sophie got into a prestigious liberal arts college. Mum cried tears of joy. I got a full scholarship to a state university. Double majored in business and computer science. Mom gave me a polite nod. "That's practical," she said. I didn't expect a parade, but a hug would have been nice. Sophie's life was full of highlights. Her first boyfriend, her first heartbreak, her trip to Paris. Each one was a grand event in our family timeline, marked with emotional posts and teary phone calls. Mine, quiet milestones. I got my first job before graduation. I moved out at 22. I started my own online boutique at 25. No drama, no neediness, no handouts. I was efficient and self-sufficient. That was my mistake. Because in my family, struggle was currency. The more visibly you struggled, the more affection you earned. Sophie knew that. She wore her struggles like badges. I buried mine, thinking success would speak for itself. It didn't single quotes T. One day, I came home for a rare family dinner. Sophie had just gotten engaged to Daniel, a clean-cut guy from an old money family. He was polite, handsome, and reeked of inherited arrogance. He had that thing where he made you feel like you were being auditioned every time you spoke. The house was buzzing with excitement. Wedding boards, color palettes, venue options. My mother was glowing like it was her wedding. I offered a quiet congratulations, and Sophie gave me a polite air kiss. Daniel's family has this vineyard upstate, she said. We might do the ceremony there. Rustic but elegant, you. No? Mom jumped in. It'll be the event of the year. Sophie deserves only the best. And there it was again. That invisible marker, dividing what was worthy and what was simply ... Not. I looked around the table, Dad sipping his wine silently, Mum gushing over floral arrangements, Sophie basking in the spotlight. I was just background noise. But I was no longer bitter. I was beginning to plan. I didn't want revenge at first. I just wanted acknowledgement, recognition. Maybe, selfishly, I wanted to matter just once. And what better place to matter than at the biggest event of Sophie's life? You see, it wasn't just a wedding I was attending. It was my moment. I didn't know exactly how it would happen, not yet. But something deep inside me whispered, they're going to remember you after this. Not her. You. And then fate did something strange. A few weeks later, I got a phone call. Mum. Not Sophie. Not Dad. Mom. That alone made pause. Her voice was tight. Forced cheerful. Emily. I need a favor. She explained that Sophie's dream wedding had ballooned into something beyond their financial capabilities. Daniel's parents were contributing. Yes, but not nearly enough to cover Sophie's vision. They needed money. Quietly. Just a loan, Mom said. Until after the wedding. We'd pay you back, of course. Of course, I paused. How much? I asked. She told me. I nearly laughed. It wasn't pocket change. It was a significant chunk even for me. But I had it. Barely. And I said yes. Not immediately. Not eagerly. But I said yes. She didn't ask why I had that kind of money. She didn't ask what I'd been doing with my life to be able to provide such a loan. She didn't ask if it would hurt me. She just said, thank you, sweetie. You've always been so ... reliable. And that was that ... reliable. Not brilliant. Not successful. Just ... reliable. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my ceiling, wondering what kind of mother looks at her daughters and sees one as a diamond and the other as duct tape. And I made a decision. This wasn't going to be just a wedding. It was going to be a reckoning. Not for vengeance. Not for chaos. But for clarity. They needed to see what they never bothered to look for. And so began the quiet weaving of my plan. The arrangements. The calls. The conversations. All delicate threads that would one day pull the entire tapestry loose. And the final touch? A toast. The kind of toast that freezes a room. The kind of toast that ends one chapter and begins another. But we weren't there yet. Not quite. First, Sophie had to walk down the aisle, and I had to make sure the spotlight turned, just slightly, until it found me. ***. It's strange how weddings, of all things, bring out both the best and the worst in people. They turn whispers into roars, secrets into stage performances, and families into a circus juggling act. A week after I wired the money to my mother, no formal agreement, no contract, just an emailed thank you and a barely there promise. To pay it back, I received my official invitation. Thick cream cardstock, golden edges, embossed names and curly lettering. Sophie and Daniel. I traced the raised letters with my finger like they were written in braille, as if trying to feel the sincerity underneath. There was none. Inside, a note handwritten by Sophie herself. Can't wait to have you with us on the big day. Maybe you'll finally meet someone. The smiley face at the end wasn't cute. It was a dart aimed and flung with sisterly smugness. It stung more than I cared to admit. That had always been Sophie's specialty. Jabs disguised as jokes. Sugar-coated insults. And our mother? She'd laugh at them like Sophie was a comedy queen. Meanwhile, if I said a single thing out of line, I was labeled bitter or jealous. But no matter. I had bigger plans now. I RSVP'd yes and started preparing not a dress or a gift, but a list. A list of everything I knew, everything I could leverage, and every move I would make leading up to the toast. My revenge wouldn't be fire, it would be ice. Sharp, slow, and impossible to ignore. First, I needed to make sure I wasn't just there. I needed to be noticed. It started with the dress. I didn't want flashy, but I wanted elegant. A floor-length black satin gown with a deep neckline and subtle shimmer. It fit like a second skin, powerful, quietly dominant, like walking confidence. Next, I arranged for a car service. Not to impress anyone, but to make a statement. When you arrive in a town car while the rest of the extended family pulls up in borrowed sedans and minivans, people talk. And I wanted them to talk. The venue was a gorgeous upstate estate, one of those vineyard-dotted properties with fairy lights strung across every tree branch and white chairs arranged in perfection. Sophie had spared no expense. Everything about it screamed curated elegance. But beneath the perfection were cracks. Cracks I knew well because I had paid to fill them. Their caterer had pulled out at the last minute. I found them a new one. The wedding planner threatened to quit after Sophie's endless demands. I offered a quiet bonus to keep her on. Even the gown, that delicate lace and silk monstrosity Sophie twirled in, had been partially covered by my loan. I touched every thread in that day without leaving a single fingerprint. That's the thing about being the invisible one. You learn how to move quietly. And in quietness there is power. The night before the wedding, we had a family dinner at the estate's guest lodge. Just immediate family. Sophie was radiant, of course. Her hair perfectly blown out. Her cheeks glowing with happiness, or wine, maybe. Daniel was at her side, half smiling like someone practicing sincerity in the mirror. Mom hovered like a nervous bee, fussing over napkins and wine pairings, acting like she was the bride. Dad, as always, kept his head low and voice lower. He was a man worn down by years of being out-talked by his wife and outshined by his daughters. But his eyes, they watched everything. As we sat down to dinner, Sophie raised her glass. I just want to say, I wouldn't be here without my family, and especially without Mom. You've done so much for me. You've made this possible. I tilted my glass, half smiling. You have no idea how much she didn't do. Mom beamed. Of course, darling. Anything for you. Not even a glance in my direction. Not even a nod. But I didn't flinch. I didn't frown. I was saving all of that for later. That night, after everyone had retired to their rooms, I slipped out onto the terrace. The air was cool, thick with dew and perfume from the rose garden. I stood there, watching the moon reflect off the vineyard, and I heard a quiet creak behind me. Couldn't sleep either? My father asked. I turned to him, surprised. He rarely initiated conversations with me. Not since I was 12 and stopped. Asking for his help with homework. Too much wine, I lied. He stood beside me, hands in his pockets. You've done well for yourself, Emily. I hope you know that. The compliment caught me off guard. I blinked at him. Thanks. He didn't look at me when he spoke again. Your mother. She doesn't always see things clearly. She means well. She just lives in Sophie's orbit. She made the orbit, I replied. A long silence. Then he sighed. You're the strong one. You always have been. That's why no one worried about you. I almost laughed. Funny how strength turns into invisibility. He didn't respond. Just nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. That was my father. A ghost in his own home. The next day dawned with birdsong and sunshine, like even nature had RSVP'd. Yes to Sophie's wedding. The bridal suite was full of chaos curlers, champagne, laughter. I stopped in briefly to say hello, but mostly stayed away. I wasn't needed. I never had been at the ceremony. I sat on the end of the third row. Not in the front row with the family. Sophie's maid of honor had arranged that. Apparently, the business sister wasn't photogenic enough. Fine by me. I watched them exchange vows under an arch of white roses. Sophie cried. Daniel smiled. Like a man signing a contract. Applause erupted. Kisses were exchanged. Cameras clicked. A drone buzzed overhead, and I waited. The reception was even more extravagant. Chandeliers hung from the tent ceiling. A jazz quartet played near the bar. People in designer heels and tailored suits danced like Instagram reels. Then came the speeches. First, the best man. Then Sophie's friend who cried too much. Then Daniel's mother who talked about legacy and lineage and tried very hard not to mention Sophie's modest background. And then Mum. She took the mic with the grace of someone who had rehearsed for weeks. She held her champagne flute like a queen with a scepter. I want to raise a glass, she began, voice trembling just enough for drama. To my daughter. My beautiful, brilliant daughter. The one who's made me so proud. Sophie beamed beside. Daniel. But I'm not talking about the bride, Mom said. And just like that, time stopped. I felt it. The air shifted. A wave of silence passed through the room like an invisible shudder. I'm talking, Mum continued, her eyes turning to me, about Emily. My name fell into the room like a stone dropped in a still lake. Gasps. Stares. She's the one who held this day together. Quietly. Gracefully. Without asking for praise or spotlight. And it's time we all see her for who she really is. Her voice cracked. She saved us when we didn't even know we needed saving. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there, hands folded on my lap, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. Sophie's face had frozen. A portrait of disbelief. Daniel looked confused, curious. The crowd turned, every head facing me, and I simply smiled. Because that moment was mine. But the story wasn't over yet. Asterisk, it took 3 full seconds before anyone clapped. Long, aching seconds. Then someone near the back, the wedding planner, I think, began clapping slowly. Others followed. Hesitant applause. Nervous glances. Confused murmurs. A smattering of clinks as people raised their glasses to echo a toast they didn't fully understand. To Emily. To me. My mother returned to her seat like she hadn't just shattered. The illusion of a perfect wedding with 16 carefully chosen words. Her face was calm, but I saw the nerves in the way her fingers trembled when she sipped from her glass. I sat still. My hands never reached for my champagne. My smile never wavered. Sophie, on the other hand, was unraveling. She leaned in toward our mother, whispering something with tight lips and furious eyes. Mom responded quietly, her mouth barely moving, but her face. It had something I'd never seen before. Guilt. Or maybe clarity. Daniel looked at them both, then turned to me. He raised his glass ever so slightly, an acknowledgement. Not warm. Not friendly. Just curious. The rest of the night went on as weddings. Though not with the same electricity. Something had been snipped. The tie between illusion and reality. And now every interaction was colored by that toast. People eyed me like I was wearing a new face. The ignored daughter, now suddenly visible. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years came up and said things like, We always knew you were the grounded one. Honestly, you've always been so elegant. Quiet strength. So what do you do exactly? You seem successful. It was laughable. These people had never cared before. But now, because my mother, their queen bee, had shifted her gaze in my direction, they suddenly buzzed around. Me like I was honey. Sophie kept smiling for the cameras. Of course she did. A lifetime of training taught her to smile through anything. But her eyes darted like a hunted deer's. I left the wedding just before dessert. I didn't need to stay. I'd already had my moment. My car waited outside, and I slipped into the back seat with the grace of a woman who knew exactly what she'd done. But the true satisfaction didn't come until 3 days later. When Sophie showed up at my apartment, I opened the door and froze. She stood there in oversized sunglasses, her hair in a bun, her lips pressed into a bitter line. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside. Of course. She walked in like she owned the place, because that's how she operated. Sophie had been the center of every room since we were children, and old habits don't die easily. "You planned that," she said, cutting straight to it. I raised an eyebrow. "Planned what?" "The toast. You told Mom to say those things. You manipulated her." "Funny," I said, walking to the kitchen. "I thought the word was helped. I helped Mom. I helped you. I helped the wedding happen." "You did." "It to humiliate me," I poured tea. "I didn't make Mom say anything. I just gave her a chance to speak the truth." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "What did you say to her?" I paused. Set the cup down. Looked her straight in the eye. I reminded her who kept the lights on when your fantasy wedding almost bankrupted her. I reminded her who bailed her out quietly, with no credit, no fanfare. Sophie's face flushed. "She didn't tell me you gave money." "No, because if she had, you would have said I was trying to ruin things, that I was bitter, that I couldn't stand seeing you happy." She flinched. Not dramatically, just a twitch. But I saw it. I continued. "So instead, I stayed silent. I let her decide whether or not to acknowledge me." "That toast? That was her choice. You knew she'd crack." I took a long sip of tea. I hoped she would. Sophie stood there, arms crossed, like she didn't know whether to scream or cry. For the first time in years, she looked lost, and I didn't enjoy it. That surprised me. I didn't want her destroyed. I just wanted her to understand. But Sophie wasn't built to understand quiet pain. Only loud applause. So I said gently, "You've always been the favorite, Sophie. That's not your fault. But it became your weapon. And I spent 28 years pretending it didn't hurt." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You could have just told me." I shook my head. "You wouldn't have listened." A beat passed. Then she turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "I'm not going to apologize," she said. "I didn't expect you to," I replied. She hesitated. "Mom's different now. She should be." And with that, she was gone. The following week, my mother called me. Not to ask for money, not to gossip, just to talk. She started by asking how my boutique was doing. That alone made me tear up. We spoke for an hour about business, life, our family. She didn't grovel, but she asked questions, real ones. She listened. It wasn't a grand change, but it was a beginning. Over the next few months, the dynamic shifted. Not overnight, but it shifted. Was no longer invisible. Sometimes still in the background. Sure, but no longer wallpaper. Now I was a fixture. A force. Sophie and I remained distant. Polite, but something softened. We weren't friends, but we weren't strangers anymore. And I felt light. I had spent years carrying the weight of silence, of being unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. That toast didn't fix everything, but it cracked the ice. Sometimes that's all you need. A single echoing crack. Hoping you have liked it so far. Before beginning the rest of the story, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you. Let's begin again. I thought the toast would be the final act. I thought I'd walk away with my head high. The invisible scars soothed by public recognition. A symbolic full-circle moment that would finally allow me to breathe in peace. But stories, like mine family stories, they don't end with one dramatic speech and a slow-motion exit. They ripple, they echo, and they disturb everything that tried so hard to pretend nothing was ever wrong. The first ripple came a week after Sophie left my apartment. I received an email from Daniel. Not a phone call, not a message through Sophie. A cold, professional email. Subject: financial disclosure request. He wanted details. Apparently, in the fallout from the wedding, cracks had appeared between him and Sophie. Real ones. Not the kind you smooth over with brunch and champagne. The kind that split a foundation in two. He had overheard enough at the wedding, seen enough from Sophie's reaction, and felt enough in her carefully curated lies to realize something didn't add up. He was digging, and I was in his crosshairs. I ignored the first message. He sent another, then another. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I replied, Daniel, you may want to direct your questions to your wife. I've said all I needed to say with my silence. He didn't reply, but 3 days later Sophie did. This time, it was a phone call. I didn't answer. Voicemail. Double quotes Emily. Her voice sounded unsteady. Daniel found out about the loan. I told him it was private family business. He doesn't understand. He thinks I lied. I didn't lie. I just protected our image. I didn't respond. I wasn't angry, surprisingly. I wasn't smug. I just felt tired. Because here it was again. Image. Appearances. The carefully posed photos. The stories edited for Instagram captions. The polished veneers. Sophie had built a glass life. And now she was shocked it was shattering. 2 weeks later, I heard through a mutual cousin that Daniel had moved out. Apparently, he had demanded full financial transparency. And when Sophie failed to provide it, the foundation cracked wide open. Their marriage had lasted 4 weeks. 4. I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't guilt either. It was more like closure. I hadn't ruined her life. She had done that on her own. I had only removed the curtain. Meanwhile, my relationship with Mom Barbara, though I still couldn't bring myself to call her that, was evolving. We began speaking weekly. Sometimes short conversations, sometimes deep ones. She started asking about my work, about my clients, about my goals. She even sent me a card on my birthday, handwritten. That had never happened before. Inside, she wrote, I see you now. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope it's not too late. Love, Mom. I cried. Not the messy, angry cry of a child who's been neglected, but the quiet, grieving kind of cry that only adults understand. The kind that mourns not what was lost but what was never allowed to exist. Around the same time, I received a letter from Dad. Yes, a letter. Typed, printed, signed in his barely legible scrawl. He wrote, Emily, I've always been proud of you. I know I didn't show it. That's on me. Watching you handle the wedding the way you did, it made me realize just how much you've grown, and how much I missed while trying to keep peace instead of creating fairness. I'm sorry. You deserved better, and I hope someday you'll forgive. Me for being silent too long. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't want to, but because I was overwhelmed. This. Wasn't the plan. I hadn't intended to fix anything. I hadn't gone in expecting apologies, reconnections, or second chances. I wanted acknowledgement. I got truth. Raw, broken, overdue, but truth nonetheless. One morning, I stood in front of my mirror, brushing my hair, sipping coffee, and I caught my own eyes. And for the first time in my adult life, I liked the reflection. I wasn't just the strong one, the capable one, the reliable daughter. I was more. I was whole. Then came the second ripple. A request from Barbara, my mother. She wanted to meet. In person. Not for lunch. Not at a cafe. She wanted to visit my place. That was big. She had never once visited my apartment. Not in all the years I'd lived on my own. Always some excuse. I'm too busy. Traffic's horrible. I don't do well in the city. This time, there was no excuse. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon. I had baked, because I wasn't sure what else to do. Some part of me still craved her approval in the form of praise over cookies. She arrived in slacks and a cardigan, her makeup minimal, her eyes tired but warmer than I remembered. Nice place, she said, scanning the room like a polite stranger. I offered tea. She accepted. We sat at my kitchen island. No small talk. Just her reaching into her purse, pulling out a folded piece of paper. I drew this up, she said. It's a repayment plan. I blinked. You don't have to. No, she cut in. I do. I want to. You helped when you didn't have to. That deserves respect. And repayment. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't the amount that surprised me. It was the signature at the bottom. Barbara. Not Mom. Just Barbara. I know I can't fix everything, she said. But I want to rebuild. I nodded. We don't have to rush. She smiled. Good. Because I'm not very good at fast fixes. Never was. And for the first time, I saw her, not the mother I had imagined. Not the woman I had resented, but a human being. Flawed. Fragile. Trying. At last. That night, after she left, I sat on my balcony with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the city breathe. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who shrank herself to fit into someone else's definition of love. And I whispered to that girl, we made it. Because we had. Not with a THUNDERCLAP. Not with a grand finale. But with a toast. Ripple. And the quiet bravery of someone who refused to stay unseen. Asterisk. The funny thing about being invisible for most of your life is that when people finally start seeing you, it almost hurts. Like light after years in a dark room. It wasn't all warmth. Being noticed comes with scrutiny, curiosity, and sometimes envy. And not just from family. In the weeks following the wedding, my inbox filled with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old classmates, extended relatives, even past co-workers who used to overlook me now wanted to catch up. It was surreal. I had the same job, lived in the same apartment, drank the same brand of coffee. But now that my name had been uttered into a microphone at a high society wedding, people acted like I had transformed into someone brand new. I hadn't changed. They had just started looking. One of the strangest messages came from Sophie's former best friend, Rachel. We hadn't spoken since college. Sophie had once convinced her that I was emotionally manipulative. Rachel's words, not mine. And now here she was in my DMs. Hey Emily, I saw some of the photos from the wedding. You looked stunning. I just wanted to say, I always admired you. I think I was too afraid to say it when we were younger. Also, I had no idea you were so accomplished. Would love to grab coffee sometime. I stared at her message for 10 minutes before replying with a polite, "Thanks for reaching out. I hope you're well." I wasn't interested in coffee. Not with people who only saw value when it was reflected in glassware and wedding speeches. I did find myself reconnecting with one person who mattered. Ava had been my roommate in college during freshman year. We lost touch after graduation, life tugging us in different directions. She was never close to my family, never impressed by Sophie's theatrics. She saw through everything from the start. When I sent her a voice note and told her the whole story from the wedding, toast to the financial unraveling, she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. "Oh my God," she said. "This is like revenge, healing and therapy all rolled into one." "You're a legend," I smiled. Ava always knew how to lift me. We started texting regularly. Coffee gates turned into dinners into late-night phone calls. Eventually, I realized she was the only one I could tell the whole truth to, the messy, imperfect, emotional truth. I told her how I didn't really feel victorious after the toast. How I felt emptied. Like I had carried a burden for so long. And when it finally fell away, I didn't know what to do with my hands. "You expected it to feel like a climax," she said one night. "But it was just a turning point." She was right. Because while the toast had been a reckoning, it hadn't erased the years that came before it. The holidays where I sat quietly while Sophie dominated the conversations. The birthdays where I got last-minute gift cards while she got diamond earrings. The cold silences after I tried to open up, only to be told I was being too sensitive. The wound was healing, but the scar would stay. And maybe that was okay. Sophie, meanwhile, went quiet on social media. No photos, no stories. The wedding posts were quietly archived. Then one morning, I got a notification. Sophie had tagged me. It was a throwback photo, us as kids, sitting in our backyard with juice boxes in hand, tangled hair and grass stains, on our knees. Her caption read, "We don't always grow up understanding our sisters. Sometimes it takes adulthood to see what we missed. Love you, Em." It was so uncharacteristic. I read it 3 times. Then came the texts. Friends. Family. People confused. Curious. "Did you two make up? What happened?" I didn't answer anyone. Instead, I picked up my phone and called her. She answered. On the second ring, "Hey," she said, her voice quieter than I expected. "That post." I began. "I meant it," she said quickly. "I know I've been a terrible sister. I've been thinking about it a lot. About us. About Mom. About everything." Silence stretched between us. Then she added, "I don't expect you to forgive me all at once. I'm trying." That word again. Trying. It echoed from Barbara. From Dad. From Sophie. Maybe trying was enough. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "Not really, just tired." "I know," she whispered. We spoke for half an hour. We didn't fix anything, but we started threading a new kind of connection, not built on competition or obligation, but on quiet honesty. Spring turned into summer. I was thriving emotionally, financially, spiritually. My boutique was growing. I hired my first employee. I started mentoring young women in business. Not for recognition, not for attention, just because I could. Because someone had to show them they mattered before the world told them they didn't. One afternoon, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a small photo album. Old family pictures. Ones I'd never seen. Ones where I wasn't cut off at the edge of the frame. In the center of the album was a handwritten note. "You were always there. I just never knew how to see you. Mum, I closed the book and exhaled. The weight of being seen is real, but so is the peace that follows. **** healing doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't arrive at your doorstep holding flowers and whispering, "You're all better now." No, healing is slow, quiet, uneven. Some days it felt like progress. Other days it felt like dragging old weights behind me. Weights I thought I had dropped, but it was real. It was happening. And it was mine. A few weeks after Sophie posted that photo of us as kids, she invited me to lunch. Not a grand event, not a family reconciliation summit, just two sisters meeting on a shaded patio at a local bistro, the kind of place where no one cared who you were or what you wore. She arrived first. Hair pulled back, no makeup, simple. Linen blouse. She looked human, less curated, more raw. "I'm trying to live offline more," she said as we sat down. I nodded. "That's good." There was an awkward pause. Then she smiled and held up the menu like it was a shield. "Still can't decide what I want." That line, so simple, so small, made something in my chest soften. Because I remembered it. She used to say it when we were kids, standing in front of the fridge or the freezer aisle. Back when decisions were silly and life didn't feel so sharp. We ordered. We chatted. Small talk. Big silences. Then Sophie said, "I filed for annulment." I looked at her. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "Honestly, I'm not. Daniel, he was a fantasy, just like everything else I tried to build. The wedding, the house, the social circle. None of it was real. Not really. I think I was trying to impress someone who didn't even know me. I knew that feeling too well. I didn't say that out loud. She sipped her iced tea. "It's crazy, right? You were the one doing the real work, building something solid. And I just spun fairy tales. No one ever stopped you," I said. Gently, she met my eyes. "And no one ever saw you. Not until you made them." A pause. Then, "Thank you." I raised a brow. "For what?" "For holding it together. For the wedding. For Mom. For not letting me drown, even when I was throwing water at you." That image lingered in my head. Her flailing. My quiet strength. I didn't know how to respond. So I just nodded. Later, as we stood to leave, she pulled me into a hug. Not stiff. Not performative. Warm. Real. For the first time in our adult lives. I hugged her back without reservation. That evening I went through my old journals. Dozens of them. Pages full of grief, jealousy, confusion, pride, anger, shame, and unspoken wishes. I read about the time I won a science fair, and Mom forgot to come. The time Sophie borrowed my favorite dress and spilled wine on it. The time I overheard my parents saying I'd be fine, because I wasn't like Sophie. I read every word. And then I took the journals, one by one, and tossed them into a box. Not to burn, not to bury, but to archive, because I wasn't that girl anymore. She had survived long enough. Now it was time to live. Weeks passed. The summer sun warmed the city, and I began embracing things I used to avoid: family gatherings, phone calls, even the occasional brunch with distant cousins who now treated me with a mix of curiosity and cautious respect. One afternoon, Barbara, yes, still Mom, but now more Barbara than ever, called and asked if I would help her with something. "I'm cleaning out the attic," she said, "trying to make space." "For clarity," I agreed. We hadn't had a mother-daughter day in years, and the idea of combing through decades of forgotten boxes sounded therapeutic. I arrived with gloves and coffee. She had already pulled half the boxes into the hallway. We sat on the dusty floor, opening one memory at a time. There were photo albums, many of them still centered around Sophie. But now I saw them differently. Not with resentment, but with curiosity. How come there are so few pictures of me? I asked softly. Barbara didn't flinch. She looked right at me and said, "Because I didn't bother to take them." Honest. Brutal. Then she added, "I thought I didn't need to. I thought you were strong. I thought you didn't need the spotlight. I see now that I was wrong." She handed me a small Polaroid dot. It was me, maybe age 6, sitting alone at the edge of a playground. Arms wrapped around my knees. Not crying. Just watching. Waiting. I stared at it. "I forgot I even had this," she whispered. "But when I found it last week, I cried for an hour." I didn't cry, but I did feel something break open in me, like a window unlatched after a long winter. Tucked the photo into my purse. Barbara reached out and held my hand. We sat in silence, surrounded by boxes and dust and a past that had finally stopped screaming. Later that evening, Sophie sent a group text. It was a simple message. "Thanksgiving this year at my place. Emily's baking. I'll make the cocktails. Let's keep it light and real." Barbara responded with a heart emoji. Dad sent a thumbs up, and I said, "Deal." There was no toast at that dinner. No speeches. No grand gestures. Just laughter. Questions. Listening. Sophie told a hilarious story about her first attempt at cooking rice. Barbara complained about her new yoga instructor. Dad fell asleep halfway through dessert. I baked too many pies. No one said to the daughter that they didn't have to, because I was there. Not on the edges, not in the shadows, right? They're visible. Present. Enough. Asterisk. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. It's not the silence of being forgotten or ignored. It's the silence of peace. The silence that comes after the storm, when the world doesn't spin so fast, and you can finally hear your own heartbeat again. That was the kind of silence I found myself living in now. It had been nearly 6 months since Sophie's wedding, 6 months since the toast, 6 months since everything shifted, not in one violent explosion, but in small, seismic shifts that slowly cracked the foundation of my family and let in the light. At first, I expected the change to wear off. I thought the attention I was suddenly receiving from my family was a temporary side effect of guilt, or maybe social pressure after that very public moment. But it stayed. It stuck. Not as a dramatic transformation, but as consistency. Barbara-Mom started calling once a week. Sometimes she'd just ask how my week was. Sometimes she'd ask for advice. Once, she even asked how I handled difficult clients at my boutique because, as she said, "You've always been better at staying calm than me." That one sentence sat with me for days. She saw me. Really saw me for who I was. One afternoon in early autumn, I received a package from Sophie. Inside was a thick, leather-bound journal. The kind you'd find in a boutique gift shop. Elegant, feminine, slightly overpriced. There was a note tucked inside. "You said once that you stopped writing years ago. I thought maybe it was time you started again. This time, not to survive, but to create. Love, Soph." I held the journal in my hands for a long time. Then I opened to the first page and wrote, "I am not invisible anymore." Thanksgiving came and went. We laughed over turkey, spilled wine, burned the rolls, and teased each other like we were learning how to be a real family again, flawed and loud and loving. Sophie, true to her word, didn't try to dominate the day. She let the room breathe. She even let me carve the turkey. It was symbolic. Small but symbolic. And for once, Barbara didn't hover. She sipped her wine and just watched us. Not like she was grading us, but like she was absorbing something she'd missed for years. Connection. Real connection. Later that night, after everyone had left and the dishes were finally done, I sat alone in Sophie's living room. She came in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and sat beside me on the couch. "Did you ever hate me?" she asked softly. The question wasn't accusatory. It was genuine. "No," I said, "but I resented you. A lot." She nodded slowly. "I don't blame you." We sat in the dim light, sipping our tea. "I spent so much of my life trying to be adored," she said. "Trying to impress everyone, to stay on top, to be ... perfect. But all it really did was isolate me." I turned to her. "And I spent my life trying not to need anything, especially not love, because I thought needing it would just make me weaker." Her eyes met mine. "We were both wrong." "Yeah. Asterisk." Then she laughed. "You know, you should write about this." I smiled. "Funny you say that." That night, I pulled out the journal she'd given me and wrote a few more lines. This isn't a revenge story. It's a story of reclamation, of finally standing in the light I built for myself. Winter came with its usual chill, but for the first time it didn't feel cold. Barbara sent me a Christmas ornament with my name engraved on it. That might sound silly to most people, but to me, it was everything. She had never once given me anything personalized before. Everything growing up was always Sophie-branded. Mail. There was a little star with my name, hanging front and center on my tree. Dad came over to help set up lights. We didn't talk much. He wasn't the talker, but he brought hot chocolate and wore his ridiculous reindeer sweater, and when he left, he gave me a side hug that lasted a second longer than usual. That was his way. That was enough. One evening, in January, I was invited to speak at a Women in Business panel. It wasn't a huge event, just a local community college initiative, but it was meaningful. They wanted me to talk about my boutique, my journey, and the lessons I'd learned. I almost said no. That old voice inside, the one that said you're not interesting enough, not shiny enough, whispered at me again. But then I remembered the toast. The silence. Afterward. The stairs. The spotlight. And how I stood in it. How I survived it. How I owned it. So I said yes. When I stood on that stage and saw a dozen young women looking up at me, some of them shy, some hungry to prove themselves, some maybe a little invisible in their own lives, I told them the truth. That success doesn't always look like flash or glitter. Sometimes it looks like showing up, day after day, building in silence, growing without applause. Sometimes it looks like not being chosen, but choosing yourself anyway. The applause I got that night wasn't thunderous, but it was real. And it echoed in a different way. It echoed. Inside. By spring, Sophie was officially divorced. She didn't throw a party. She didn't post about it. She just called me and said, "So, do you want to go to Italy?" I blinked. "What?" "Come on." 2 sisters, 1 plane, 3 cities, a rental car, bad Italian, great food. We never did anything together. "Not really. Let's change that." I hesitated, but then I smiled. Okay. We weren't trying to erase the past. We were rewriting the future, one quiet victory at a time. And this time, the story wasn't just hers. It was ours. Asterisk the thing about traveling with someone you've known your entire life, yet barely known at all, is that the trip becomes more than sightseeing. It becomes a revelation. Italy was beautiful, of course. Terracotta rooftops in Florence, gondolas swaying gently in Venetian canals, the golden haze of Rome at sunset. But what made the trip unforgettable wasn't the country. It was the space. It gave us. Sophie and I weren't tourists. We were two women unlearning each other. In Venice. We shared a hotel room for the first time since we were kids. It was chaotic in the best way. Her suitcase exploding with outfits she never wore. My tiny travel pouch with neatly rolled clothes and one perfect black dress I wore twice. We spent the first night sitting on the balcony, wrapped in throw blankets, sipping cheap wine and watching the city shimmer. I used to hate how perfect you were, she said suddenly. I blinked. Me? She nodded, serious. You had your life together. While I was breaking things just to feel something, you were building quietly. I pretended I was the successful one because I had the attention. But deep down, I envied your peace. It took me a moment to reply. I used to hate how loved you were, I admitted. You could say the dumbest things and everyone would laugh like it was genius. I spent years trying to be smart enough, impressive enough, just to be noticed. We let the truth sit between us. No one cried. No one flinched. Sat in it. And healed. Florence was different. It was laughter and markets, gelato twice a day, and a bottle of wine that got us giggling until we nearly got kicked out of a little family-run trattoria. It was Sophie grabbing my hand in a street market and dragging me toward a jewelry vendor. You need this, she said, holding up a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm. A small star. Why? I asked. She smiled. Because it's your story now. You're the star. I didn't cry. But I wore that bracelet every day after. In Rome. We visited the Vatican. Not for religious reasons, neither of us had been raised particularly devout, but because we wanted to see the Sistine Chapel, the art, the grandeur. As we stood beneath that painted ceiling, heads tilted, arms folded, Sophie whispered, "You ever feel like God skipped over us?" I thought for a moment. No. I think maybe he just made us take the long way. She nodded. And then we sat on a bench outside, in the sun, and said nothing at all. When we returned from Italy, something had shifted permanently. We were no longer competitive. We were collaborative. Not in business. Our worlds were still vastly different. But in spirit, in heart. We started texting regularly. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation. Just because. I started sending her photos of fabric samples I was considering for my boutique spring line. She sent me screenshots of therapy quotes that hit her hard. We didn't become best friends overnight, but we became real friends. For the first time. Barbara, meanwhile, continued to evolve too. She joined a community book club, took up watercolor painting, and even started dating again. A retired marine biologist named Craig, who wore bucket hats and called me kiddo. She still had her dramatic streak. She still made a scene if the restaurant was too cold or the waiter forgot lemon for her water. But she was trying. And this time, I saw the effort. One afternoon, she came into my boutique and sat on the velvet couch in the corner while I worked. Always thought you'd be someone, she said as I rang up a customer. I am someone, I replied. She smiled. I know. I just wish I'd known it sooner. Me too, I said. But I wasn't angry anymore. Spring turned into summer, again. 1 year since the wedding, Sophie didn't remarry. She didn't throw a party. Instead, she organized a quiet family picnic in a local park. Just us, Barbara, Dad, a couple cousins, and Ava, who'd finally met Sophie and surprisingly liked her. There were no speeches, just music, laughter, and the occasional shriek of children playing tag in the grass. Sophie handed me a cupcake, my favorite flavor, lemon, with cream cheese frosting. No toast this year? I teased. She grinned. You already got yours. And she was right. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need applause. I had something better. Love, without performance. Respect, without spectacle. Peace, without pretending. That night, back in my apartment, I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and opened the journal Sophie had given me. I flipped to the last page, and I wrote, "They saw me. Not because I forced them to, but because I stopped hiding. And maybe that's what power really is. Being willing to shine, even when no one claps." A year after the wedding, I found myself back at the venue. Not as a guest, not as a sister of the bride, but as a vendor. One of the wedding planners I'd met through Sophie reached out, asking if my boutique would be willing to do a custom line of bridal party robes and accessories for a client. I said yes. The project went smoothly. The bride was kind, the planner professional. But as I walked through the same hallway, where I'd once stood in the shadow of Sophie's wedding dress, listening to the applause meant for someone else, I realized just how far I'd come. Place wasn't haunted anymore. It didn't hold power over me. It was just a building. I was just passing through this time on my own terms. As I left the venue, I passed a framed photo in the hallway, a collage of weddings that I had taken place there. And there, in the bottom corner, was Sophie and Daniel, frozen in their first dance, her face glowing, his arms around her. I looked at it for a second, not with bitterness. But with clarity. Not every ending has to feel like a tragedy. Some endings are just lessons that finally made space for better beginnings. Sophie called me that night. I told her where I'd been. There was a pause. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I'm great." She didn't say anything right away, but I could feel her smiling on the other end. "I started dating again," she confessed. I raised an eyebrow, even though she couldn't see me. "Anyone worth mentioning?" "Too early to say. But he doesn't care about Instagram." And he asked me what my favorite book was. "Not my favorite designer." "Sounds promising." I told him Little Women. "But I haven't read it in years. I'm reading it now so I don't get caught." I laughed. "Classic Sophie. Classic me," she said. "But also, maybe a better version of me." Barbara came over the next weekend. With Craig. He helped me fix a leak under the sink. Barbara brought lemon bars. We talked about nothing and everything: gardening, the news, my boutique's upcoming expansion. I mentioned I was opening a second location in a different neighborhood, a bigger space. Barbara blinked. "Wow, that's huge." "I know. I'm proud of you, Emily." I froze. She had said those words before, but not like this. Not casually. Not freely. Not without needing to pair them with something about Sophie or our family. This time, it was just for me. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her hair was going grey in elegant streaks now. She wore reading glasses with a leopard print frame. And she looked softer, calmer, more human. "Thanks, Mom." She smiled. And for the first time, it felt okay to call her that again. On the first day of summer, I stood in my new store. It was still half-finished shelves uninstalled, dresses in plastic garment bags, tags waiting to be printed. But the sunlight poured through the windows like gold, and the space felt full of potential. Sophie showed up unexpectedly with iced coffee and a tape measure. "I figured you'd need help," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "You know how to use that thing?" "Not at all. But I look very productive holding it." We laughed. She stayed for hours, helped unpack boxes, got covered in glitter from a broken decor ornament and wore it like a badge of honor. At one point, she stood in the center of the room and turned in a slow circle. "You really built this," she whispered. I did. You're kind of amazing. You know that? It still startled me, hearing things like that from her. But I was learning to receive them. To let love land, instead of dodging it out of habit. Later that night, we ordered pizza and sat on the store floor, legs stretched out, sipping soda like we were teenagers again. She told me more about her new boyfriend, an editor for a small publishing house. Quiet, funny, thoughtful. He's nothing like Daniel, she said. That's probably a good thing. She nodded. You were right, by the way. The toast? It didn't ruin my wedding. It saved me. I looked at her. I didn't do it to save you. I know, but it made me wake up. Sometimes love has to be sharp before it can be soft. I tucked that phrase away in my mind, because it was true. At the end of the night, as we locked up, she turned to me. I never asked you something. What's that? Did you know Mom was going to say that? About you being the daughter she's most proud of? I thought for a moment. No, but I gave her the chance to. Sophie smiled. That's what makes you powerful. You don't take the spotlight. You create it. When I got home that night, I opened my journal again. The one she gave me. I wrote. Didn't get revenge. I got something better. I got respect. I got reconciliation. And most importantly, I got myself back. Asterisk, it was a warm September afternoon when the invitation came. Not a wedding, not a party. A speaking engagement. The local women's entrepreneurship conference was holding their annual event, and one of the keynote speakers had to cancel last minute. Someone had recommended me. At first, I hesitated. Public speaking still made my hands sweat. But something inside me whispered, you've already done harder things. So I said yes. And 3 weeks later, I stood backstage in a soft cream pantsuit, hands trembling just slightly, listening as the MC introduced me. Please welcome the founder of M&Co, a 2-store fashion brand that began with one woman, a dream, and an unforgettable voice. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It didn't shake the rafters, but it was warm. Genuine. Enough. I stepped out into the lights, looked out at the crowd, and smiled. I used to think being overlooked was something I had to accept. I began. I was the quiet one, the strong one, the reliable one, the daughter who didn't cause problems, the sister who didn't shine too bright. A few nods rippled through the crowd. That strength that goes unrecognized doesn't make it less valuable. It makes it misunderstood. And for a long time, I misunderstood myself. I paused. Let that sink in. Then I told them the story, not with every detail, not with family drama at the center, but with truth at its heart. The moment I decided to stop performing. The moment I stood up, spoke up, and claimed space that had never been freely given. I'm not standing here today because someone finally chose me, I said near the end. I'm standing here because I chose myself, again and again, especially when no one else would. That line got the loudest applause of the day. Afterward, dozens of women came up to hug me, thank me, share their own stories. One young woman, maybe 21, eyes watery, whispered, "You just told my life." I hugged her, because I knew what it felt like to be voiceless in your own story. Later that night, I sat at home in my favorite robe, tea in hand, the bracelet Sophie gave me glinting on my wrist. I texted her, spoke at a conference today, cried on stage, didn't die. She replied with a gif of a queen adjusting her crown. You were always meant for a microphone. You just didn't have the right audience. Barbara called an hour later. I heard from a friend that you crushed it. You have spies now? I laughed. Just proud friends. She paused. You know, I still remember what I said that day at the wedding. So do I. I meant it, Emily. You're the daughter I'm most proud of. I smiled. I believe you now. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not. Just glanced look. I saw a woman who had walked through the fire of family. Not with revenge, but with grace. Who hadn't burned bridges, but instead built better ones. Who didn't scream to be seen, but simply stood tall enough that no one could ignore her anymore. I wasn't the forgotten sister anymore. I wasn't the supporting character. I wasn't the quiet one who quietly saved everyone else. I was the author of my story, the architect of my peace, and the daughter I chose to be. Asterisk, thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge so that we could understand you are with us till the end. As well as please let us know where are you watching from. Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy.